It's the Growing for Market podcast.
Particularly from a soil health perspective, that we really need to be cycling carbon or organic matter back into the system to see improvements in soil health. Because that carbon, that organic matter, is really the food for the microbes and let's say the glues for stabilizing soil particles together and having good soil structure. And so some of the early results, I will say I'm still doing some of the analysis here, so I can't say I'm 100% done with it, but we are seeing differences from a soil health perspective for some of the treatments with some of our more like novel treatments where we add biochar and we add carbon or compost and urine. So we're getting that carbon in addition to our nitrogen needs for the crop. We're seeing higher soil health within those treatments.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. So, you got your soil tested, or you need your soil tested. It's time to contact Ohio Earth Food. Since 1972, they have been growers' trusted source for organic soil amendments to apply before you plant to prevent those deficiency symptoms that limit production. Their knowledgeable staff have all been a part of certified organic operations and can help you choose the best products for your soil and deliver or ship them right to your farm. With locations in Northwest Ohio and just north of Madison, Wisconsin, Ohio Earth Food wants to be your partner for organic inputs. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil and put their Revita fertilizers in your beds, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com.
Are you ready to make 2026 your most productive growing season yet? Hi, I'm Emily from Tillmore, and we're here to help you get there.
And I'm Aaron. At Tillmore, we offer practical tools for every scale. Planting to cultivation, soil amendments, harvest tools, and now even bird control. We can be your one-stop shop for all your vegetable and flower growing solutions.
And if you're not sure what's right for your farm, we offer free consultations to help dial in weed control and overall workflow.
One unit growers are especially excited about is the Super E, our electric cultivating tractor. It's quiet, powerful, and makes precision weeding a whole lot easier.
We're also proud to bring TerraTech's full catalog of high-quality tools to growers across the U.S.
At the end of the day, we care about helping farmers succeed and stay profitable heading into the new year.
Learn more and book your free consultation at tillmore.com.
Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Tatiana Schreiber, Abe Noe-Hays, and Debbie Aller to the Growing for Market podcast. Abe and Tatiana are from the Rich Earth Institute, and Deborah Aller is at Cornell University, and they all collaborated on a recent SARE grant about reusing human waste as a fertilizer. Rich Earth works to help recycle human urine into fertilizer with the idea that if this could be done at scale, not only would it provide an inexpensive source of fertilizer, but it would also keep a lot of pollution out of our waterways. They just completed a SARE grant looking at the soil health impacts and farmer perspectives on using various forms of human waste as a fertilizer. The final report isn't even written yet, though they do have the results, so you get a sneak peek at the takeaways from this study. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Tatiana, Abe, and Debbie.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, so when we have one guest, I usually write an introduction for the guest, but it seemed like a bit much to write an introduction for all three of you. So can I ask you each to quickly introduce yourselves for our audience?
Yeah, I'll go first then, Andrew. But yeah, I'm Debbie Aller. I'm a senior extension associate at Cornell University, and I'm the director of the New York Center for Organics Recycling and Education, which was previously the Cornell Waste Management Institute. And I've had the pleasure of collaborating with the Rich Earth Institute on this recent SARE project previously when I was down on Long Island.
Okay.
I'm Abe Noe-Hays. I'm the director of research at the Rich Earth Institute, and I've been involved with various forms of human waste recycling since the year 2000. I did my college work with composting toilets, high temperature composting of compost and toilet waste. That grew into interest in urine recycling due to the great nutrient content of urine. And now also that has continued on full circle to other forms of human waste, including solid waste recycling that we do at the Rich Earth Institute. I should also mention that I'm the CTO at Brightwater Tools, which is a spin-off company, a for-profit spin-off of the Rich Earth Institute. And we develop equipment for recycling urine and other high-strength organic wastes as a fertilizer for use on farms.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll want to make sure and talk about that Brightwater as well during this interview.
Okay, and I'm Tatiana Schreiber. I'm the social research director at Rich Earth Institute and have been working there for a number of years. Most of my work at Rich Earth is involved with trying to ensure that the research participants that we work with are working with us as collaborators or partners. And so we often include interviews with farmers or farm advisors or consumers, customers of farmers on the projects that we work on. Some projects that aren't farm related, but for the farm related ones, that's kind of what my role is usually. And I have a background in environmental anthropology and agroecology academically. And I also have worked as a small scale grower myself, growing organic, heirloom, and unusual garden seedlings.
Okay, cool. Well, and I'm glad that you're talking to the farmers on all this because, of course, if you want to get them to do it, we got to know how they're feeling about it. So I know that's part of your grant. I'm excited to talk about that in a minute. But maybe we should start at the beginning. Can you tell me how long has the Rich Earth Institute been around and why does it exist?
Sure. It was founded in 2012. I was one of the co-founders along with Kim Nace. We started the organization with the idea of conducting a community scale, on the ground, actual demonstration of urine recycling as fertilizer. Because at that point, there were a bunch of people who used urine in their gardens as a fertilizer. We knew it worked. But there were a number of academics who are publishing papers about certain ways of processing urine or certain perspectives or models for how urine could be used. But no one was actually collecting urine at a community scale. And we thought that was a critical missing piece. So we started doing that in 2012 and built on that as a platform. We built a research program, our own research and research from academics at University of Michigan, University at Buffalo, now Cornell University. And so that seed planted in 2012 has grown into now a full-scale, community-scale project that has hundreds of participants and is being replicated in other parts of the country and world as well. In Cape Cod, there's a big initiative to recycle urine now to deal with their nitrogen pollution issues. In France, in Paris, there's an initiative that drew some inspiration from us. And that was really the goal. And that was the vision from the beginning, was how can we actually collect urine from real people and get it to real farms?
Okay, very cool. I've always been aware, of course, that there's a lot of nutrients in urine and human waste in general. In fact, I used to work for a farmer who, when we would have to step off to the side of the field and go to the bathroom, he'd say, "I'm going to go participate in the nitrogen cycle." So then we all started saying that when we worked on his farm. So it's very common to use various forms of animal manure as fertilizer. Why aren't we already using human waste as a fertilizer? Is it just the ick factor that people may have when they think about fertilizing with their own waste? Or are there issues with using human waste like diseases, parasites, or the pharmaceuticals or other things that may make it through to the final product?
Well, first, I want to say I also worked for a farmer who said a very similar thing. So that was one of the ways I got thinking about this in the first place. But to answer your question, why isn't it being done? What are the concerns? I think that we can look at history and see that human waste, including human urine, were used extensively, especially in Asia, but other places as well, for a long period of time. And I think that the biggest reason that declined was the advent of inexpensive synthetic fertilizer, because that was certainly a simpler way to apply fertilizer rather than all of the effort of collecting and transporting and applying human waste or its products. But what Rich Earth Institute has really picked up on and made central in our approach to it is that pollution prevention is the modern issue, because nutrient pollution is a huge issue impacting waterways all around the coast of the United States and many, if not most countries in the world. And a lot of that pollution comes from agricultural runoff. A lot of it comes from agricultural products that get sold and eaten by humans and then excreted in our waste into our toilets and then washed eventually into waterways and into sensitive ecosystems. That pollution prevention that you can create by separating those nutrients out, keeping them out of the wastewater, that is actually worth a lot more in terms of dollars and cents than the nitrogen dollar value of the fertilizer produced. So we realized that actually the reason this stopped, perhaps, that recycling human waste into fertilizer stopped largely, is because of cheap synthetic fertilizers. But the reason that it's starting up again now is the extreme expense of getting those nutrients out of wastewater once it's been polluted. So the way that we see it at Rich Earth Institute is that recycling the nutrients is an environmental and a social and a public good, but the economic driver is the need to clean up water, and the fact that diverting urine, keeping it out of wastewater in the first place, is much more economical than sending urine down the sewer pipe and then trying to sort that out at the wastewater plant.
I also wanted to respond to the comment about the ick factor. We have found in our interviews with consumers and with farmers, well, farmers in general, as you could probably suspect, actually don't have that much of an ick factor when it comes to use of urine. It's just not, it's like, so what kind of thing. But with terms of consumers, the ones we've talked to, it's really interesting to me to find out that when you explain to people the nutrient value of the urine, for a lot of people, it just makes sense. And they don't have that much of an ick factor. When it comes to feces, that's another question. People do have more of an ick factor there. And so we can talk more about that later in the conversation. But, people are always saying, what about the ick factor? And I just find it interesting that in many, many interviews that we've done, we find that people don't really have, once they become comfortable. I mean, that nobody has it, but also we have also found with our urine nutrient reclamation project in Brattleboro, Vermont, that once people start collecting urine and using it, as they become more familiar with it and get used to it, the ick factor kind of dissipates fairly quickly.
Yeah.
I'd add one thing about that as well, is that this is not the only bodily waste that's used in agriculture. Pig manure is pretty unpleasant stuff. No one thinks twice about using that in agriculture. So I think that one thing that we've realized is that when people think about the idea of recycling human waste or human urine into fertilizer, they worry that other people will think that it's unpleasant. But that's an ascribed attitude. And I'm sort of stealing some of Tatiana's thunder here. She's the one who worked that out. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, Tatiana.
Yeah, just as you said, we talked to lots of other people, and it's not just farmers, but all kinds of people who will just say, well, it doesn't bother me that much, but I think it would bother, my neighbor or my friend or my parent or whatever. So that we decided to call that ascribed attitudes, attitudes that people ascribe to others, is much more predominant than people's actual feelings, at least the people we've interviewed so far, which doesn't represent all people. But it reminds me of another point, which is another thing that people often say is when we talk about this, is that they say, well, my parent or my grandparent used to do this. Or also when we talk about people who come from other countries, they'll say, well, back in Dominican Republic, everybody collects their pee and uses it or whatever, not everybody, but it's just often people refer to someone in their past, or they're aware of that it's been used, as Abe said before, for, centuries or countries.
Mm-hmm.
So then another remaining question is it safe? And everyone wants to know that. And there's certainly a huge difference between talking about urine and feces, because all the diseases we associate with poor sanitation, those all are derived from fecal contamination. And so there's an extreme importance in maintaining a safe and thorough treatment of feces before it ends up anywhere in the environment, including in agriculture, where it could come in contact with us or our food. Urine is a different matter. It's not truly sterile, but it is not a significant source of pathogens for disease transmission. So it's It's safe to use in home gardens. It's safe to use in agriculture. The World Health Organization published some guidelines a few years back, explained how you could use it in home gardening with no treatment at all. As long as it's pure urine, just urine being collected, and as long as you wait 30 days after fertilizing a crop before you eat raw produce from that crop, and you wash your hands after applying the urine, then there is no significant health risk. So a lot of home gardeners do this, and I don't think there's any health risk involved in that, which is wonderful because it's something that's at everyone's disposal. We make it every day. And if we grow food, we often need a source of nitrogen. So that's a great match for it. At the Rich Earth Institute, we do pasteurize the urine. So all that said about the safety of urine, some of our urine comes from urine diverting toilets, which is a toilet with a divided bowl. The back part flushes solids, including paper and feces, into the sewer. The front part has its own drain that collects urine that goes to a tank. There's always the potential for some fecal cross-contamination. So we need to pasteurize that. And we do that with an energy-efficient pasteurizer, and also one that Brightwater Tools created and sells. Other things people are concerned about are pharmaceuticals, heavy metals, PFAS. And heavy metals is the easy one. We've been testing urine for over a decade now, and the heavy metals levels are always very low. They're often about 1,000 times lower than our permit allows. Pharmaceuticals are certainly measurable because people take all sorts of medicines and drugs, and we excrete a portion of that in the urine. We did a multi-year study with the University of Michigan and the University at Buffalo. And that was just published this year, finally. After much work and much revision, we finally had a version to publish. And the results were striking because the actual amount that made it through into the lettuce we were growing as a test crop was vanishingly small. The most abundant drugs that we could find in the crop were over-the-counter things like ibuprofen or acetaminophen, naproxen, that class of drugs. But in order to get a single dose of any one of those drugs, you would have to eat a salad from this test plot every day for almost 3,000 years. So it's quite a small exposure, and one that we don't believe really is that concerning. Then the remaining one is PFAS, and that's the one that's really emerging. People are very concerned about PFAS, so-called forever chemicals.
Yeah.
And so we've been testing for PFAS in our urine every year. That's a requirement of our permit. And we've also been doing a lot of research on the amount of PFAS in urine and other agricultural inputs. And one significant thing that we have found is that the amount of PFAS in urine that you would apply it in a year on a farm is many, many times lower than the existing background levels of PFAS that are already in the soil, largely from rainwater or other sources. Adding urine as a fertilizer to soil will not change the levels of PFAS in the farmland to any measurable or significant amount. There are other factors that are much more important affecting PFAS on farms.
Okay, well, that's good to know because I imagine people will be thinking about that. And yeah, my understanding is that unfortunately, there's like a background level of PFAS that's in 99% of us already. I'm thinking like, well, if you're fertilizing with cow manure, chicken manure, pig, or anything else, like my understanding is that there's a low level of PFAS pretty much everywhere in the environment. So I guess it's good for you to make sure that it's not any higher in people, but unfortunately the world that we live in, my understanding is there's essentially a background level in PFAS, and I'm glad you addressed that because it's been a huge problem here in Maine. You're probably aware that there are some farms that were very heavily contaminated with spreading sewage sludge decades ago, but that's why they call them forever chemicals, right? Because they don't really disperse or go away in the environment.
Yeah.
And so in fact, Maine was the first state to ban sludge spreading, and I think Connecticut just banned it also, but I know that's getting a lot of attention, and rightly so right now. So I'm glad that you looked into that.
Yeah. One more thing I'd say about that, actually, before we move off that topic, people often think that the PFAS in sewage sludge is there because of human waste, that it came from people. But it is important to remember that humans are not the source of PFAS. We are one of the many systems that PFAS moves through. But in sewage sludge, especially in the highly contaminated sewage sludges, that PFAS was coming from industry or from other sources or chemicals that were used. They weren't coming from our human bodies because the amount in the food we eat is a much smaller amount than all these other flows of PFAS that are moving through our environments.
Right. Yes, indeed. In fact, I can say here in Maine, I think The problem was that they were taking waste from places that were making like paper plates and things like that. And I guess they were putting PFAS in the paper plates so that the grease, like when you're at a picnic or whatever, doesn't bleed through the paper products. And they didn't realize that, of course, that was going through this waste stream. And that's how you've got some farms that are very heavily contaminated with PFAS. So the point is, it's not coming from people, it's going into people potentially. So I'm glad that you verified that. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share 2 new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number 1, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number 2, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs. Combining retail and wholesale inventories and records. And, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel-framed end walls, roll-up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands-on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops. And now, back to the show. Actually, one thing I didn't realize was how many nutrients are going into the waterways post sewage treatment, because sort of like as a farmer perspective, I was thinking of it like, ooh, like I'm getting rid of all these good nutrients. Plus also here in the middle of Maine, we're on septic, but I didn't realize, it makes perfect sense now that you think of it, but I did not realize that a lot of waste treatment plants are treating the human waste, sanitizing it, and then putting it off into waterways. Because I think we're all familiar with the dead zone that's in the Gulf of Mexico from fertilizer. And I always was thinking about all the runoff from the fields, that runs off into the Mississippi. I did not think about about all the nutrients that are going into our waterways. Like, I just didn't make that connection between water treatment plants, and of course they've got to put all that stuff somewhere. So, there's this whole other dimension. Like, I went into this interview thinking about the sort of like farmer recouping their nutrients perspective, and I feel like you're telling me there's almost an even bigger thing of trying to remedy the algal blooms and all the problems that are caused by dumping all this fertility, it could be going onto someone's field into our waterways. So what are the nutrients in human waste that we are mostly flushing down the toilet at this point?
Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the biggest ones in human urine, but also all the trace nutrients are in there as well. So there's sulfur, there's iron, there's calcium, and anything you can think of as a nutrient that would be in the food you eat is also in the waste that leaves your body. The urine is particularly high in nitrogen. That's the largest amount. So it's a high nitrogen fertilizer. And that nitrogen, after the urine is stored for a little while, is typically available as ammonia. So it's a highly soluble, highly available nutrient. It leaves our body as urea, turns to ammonia as it decomposes, And then there's different processes that can convert it into nitrate. So all those are part of the suite of what's available depending how you process it. But what that means for a farmer is that the urine is a complete fertilizer. It has a little bit of everything, but it has more nitrogen than anything else. So it's great in the springtime when there's not a lot of available soil nitrogen from decomposition of organic matter. It's great for getting a jump start in the spring. And it's also good as a side dressing. We use it on corn in some of our field trials as an initial fertilizer and also as a side dressing fertilizer. And in terms of how much is there, we did an analysis a few years back for the New York Times for their Earth Day edition, looking at how much food can you grow. Our favorite example was a loaf of bread. You can grow an entire loaf of bread from the amount of urine you create in a day. So if you imagine, that's a big chunk of your diet. If you can make a loaf of bread every day from what you're peeing into the toilet, that's quite a reversal.
Yeah, that's a real amount of fertilizer right there. And I know a lot of farmers talk about closing the circle of inputs, and like, you could start at home with that.
Also, the secondary and micronutrients may also be important, in ways that we don't really know exactly. But some farmers have said that they feel like using urine as a fertilizer could be potentially a way to reduce some of the other amendments that they have to add to meet certain other nutrient requirements that they have. For example, wood ashes, or whatever. Many farmers add, wood ashes or something like that to increase the magnesium or calcium content or some of the micronutrients as well. So I feel like, we'd like to see more studies on more different kinds of crops, but on the crops that and we'll probably get at this more too when we start talking about the results of our recent work, but many of our other research projects we've done have shown pretty much comparable results to whatever other fertilizer most people are using. They're finding pretty much comparable results with the urine in terms of the plant health and robustness. And, some people have said, wow, this is interesting. Maybe I could reduce X other amendment.
Yeah, well, that would be the dream, right? Is to replace whatever else you're putting on with what you're making. So I want to talk about the SARE grant project you just completed, but before we get into it, I feel like we should define our terms of what you're actually applying as fertilizer. In the grant, you talk about using biosolids, derived biochar, and source-separated human urine. Let's take those one at a time. What is source-separated human urine?
It's actually a good question for the Rich Earth folks, but that's exactly what Abe was describing before. Of this is human urine where for a source separation toilet where the back goes to the feces and the front goes to the urine. So we're working with the urine here and pasteurized human urine as a soil amendment.
Okay, so that's what you mean about source separated. It's just like separating the pee from the poop, basically.
Rather that we're separating it at the toilet is the source. So rather than mixing the urine and the feces in with the flush water, we're, in terms of confusion, people think, is it separation of the pee and the poop? Or is it separation of the human waste from the wastewater? And actually, let me just, I'll pitch that back to you, Debbie, but I wanted to make sure that was the direction we were headed here.
Oh, okay, right. So they're collected separately and you're not separating them. Okay.
You're collecting it separate from all the other wastewater.
They're collected separately at the source. When you're actually going to the bathroom, you're utilizing the urine separately from the feces, so it's never actually mixed together. And so that urine is then pasteurized. So within the SARE study, we were looking at various different what we call novel soil amendments. And so I'm a soil scientist by training, and I'm really interested in thinking about alternative sources of nutrients for crop production. So how do we move away from some of our synthetic fertilizers? One of the most common one is urea. That's the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer in the world. Farmers are very familiar with it. And within this trial, we were looking at how do other sources of fertility, being urine, potentially biosolids, biochar, and biomass biochar and compost, how do these different soil amendments compare to a common fertilizer being urea from a fertility standpoint as well as a soil health standpoint? And so beyond this human urine, and we're talking about biochar as a potential other soil amendment. And so many farmers are becoming familiar with what biochar is, but there's still lots of people that have never heard of it, or they're hearing it for the first time. So biochar, it's organic material that has been pyrolyzed. And so pyrolysis is essentially the burning of organic material in the absence of oxygen. So pyrolysis is different than incineration or combustion, but at the end you get a charcoal-like product that's a very carbon-rich material and very stable when it's applied to the soil or to the environment. And so we're talking about biochar in the context of agriculture here. It has many other applications, but how biochar is different than things like compost or manure or other common soil amendments that farmers are familiar with is the stability of the carbon and it being a very long-lasting soil amendment. So within this study, we were looking at two different types of biochar. So biochar can be produced from any organic matter, as I mentioned. And so in this study, we were looking at it produced from biosolids or the sewage sludge and from woody waste material. So in all cases, we're utilizing sustainably sourced waste products to produce that biochar. And I just want to go back to saying biosolids, biochar, in the sense that we've seen when you put biosolids through the pyrolysis process, a lot of the contaminants, PFAS, are removed from pyrolysis. A lot of work has shown that you remove these chemicals and contaminants by up to 99%, depending upon the pyrolysis conditions. So we're utilizing a soil amendment that, from a contamination standpoint, is much safer than raw biosolids applications. They're completely different products, and I think that's important to mention here.
Okay, so that's why you're burning or doing pyrolysis to the biosolids, is because that deals with the pathogens and contamination issues.
Yes, there's a lot of evidence that pyrolysis destroys PFAS compounds and you don't have other contaminants within that end product. So we're not talking about biosolids as a raw land application of biosolids, these class A biosolids. We're talking about biochar produced from biosolids, which eliminates these contaminants, and that being safe for soil application.
Okay.
And the other biochar we're looking at is through woody waste material, which is a very common feedstock in the Northeast, in Maine, in Vermont, and in New York. It comes from lumber mills or other potentially power line prunings, municipality trimming of trees and maintenance, and you get a lot of woody waste biomass. So it's a huge feedstock for producing biochar in the Northeast. And so we were looking at two different biochar types, and then comparing that also with compost as being a very common practice that farmers are familiar with, and then also urine, and how does that compare to synthetic fertilizer use? That's what we were really interested in within these trials. Another part of this trial and the reason for selecting these different soil amendments is thinking about the different sources of carbon and nutrients, in particular how readily available the nutrients are, and also the stability, what we say the labile or recalcitrant, so how readily available or how not easily able to degrade and cycle and break down sources of carbon and nutrients within these amendments. And so let's say carbon and nutrients within compost are more readily available to plants and microbes to be broken down, whereas biochar is very stable when it's added to the soil. And so seeing how these different amendments impact soil health and crop growth was a really important aspect of the study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think a lot of growers are probably familiar with biochar that's made from wood. I mean, like we've had articles of how they can make it in the magazine and stuff like that. So that's hopefully they can just think of it as like biochar made of human waste.
Not human waste though.
Wood.
Not human waste, but sewage sludge, because biosolids is an industry term for stabilized sewage sludge. So it's human waste, and it's also whatever else went down the drain, which means there can be any number of various contaminants in biosolids. And that's why biosolids has to be measured, the amount that is in it before it's land applied in states where that's legal. And that's why there's so much debate about whether it's a good idea or not to use biosolids in agriculture. one reason we're really interested in biosolids, biochar, is because of that reduction in micropollutants by the high temperature of the biochar pyrolysis process. It's actually much greater than a 99%, 99.99, whatever percent reduction for many chemicals, including many PFAS. But there are still some questions. We're not at the point where we're saying this is what people should do. We're at the point of saying we're interested in learning more about the process and how it works in the soil, what it does to soil health. That's one thing we're looking at. We're also doing research, literature research, and talking to other researchers about what they're finding about PFAS destruction, because there is very compelling evidence, but there are also real world considerations, like it performs a certain way in a lab. How does it perform in real life, in a real industrial setting where issues are coming up and people are trying to keep a machine running? Maybe things aren't ideal. Also, there are questions around not just the pyrolysis process, not just how pure is the biosolids biochar product, but during that process, are PFAS released into the air, for instance, during drying, which they can be released during high temperature drying. So people are saying low temperature drying of the sludge is probably the way to go. But I think that there's going to be more research in that we can use to form public policy opinions about, is this a good idea or not? We're definitely not at the point of having conclusions there, but we're at the point of particularly looking at what's the soil health impact in this study, because it's a 3-year study for SARE, and we have a 2 more year study through another grant through the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. And so that's the part we're examining.
Okay, so still very much an ongoing research project.
Yeah. I wanted to just also speak, since we're talking about definitions and these words that we're using, it is very confusing. And one thing we have found from the research, from the interviews that we've done with farmers and the dialogue groups that we also did, we did a couple of field days and we talked to participants at the field days, that the terminology that we're using is very confusing. So we just want to be really clear that we use the term source separated at Richards Institute to mean materials that are separated at the source. But like we found earlier in the conversation, people are confused and think that we're talking about the separation of pee from poop and all that. And no, what we mean by the term is separation at the source and not mixing in with other materials through the wastewater treatment process. And I think it's because we're so familiar with thinking about all these things that to us it's intuitive that that's what source separated means. But I know for the general public, it's not. So we want to be really clear. And similarly, the term biosolids, biochar, we're finding people are very confused about because, like you said, many people, they understand that biosolids was a term created by the wastewater treatment industry to refer to sewage sludge. It's the same thing as sewage sludge. People understand what sewage sludge is, but not when we start talking about biosolids, biochar, they start thinking about charring feces or human waste. And that makes sense, but that's not what we're talking about in this particular study. We're talking about, as Abe was saying earlier, we're talking about making biochar from the sewage sludge. Not to say that making biochar from human feces source separated wouldn't be a good idea. That's another topic, but it's not what we looked at in this particular study.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's why I wanted to talk about all the terms up front, because they wanted to define our terms since people may not be used to these terms.
And there are other forms of source separating toilets, like a composting toilet is source separating. It takes the urine and the feces together and keeps it separate from all the gray water in the house. So you can source separate all your human waste with a composting toilet, or a micro flush, like a vacuum flush toilet, and flush to a liquid treatment works. As long as it's not connecting to all the other waste that goes into the sewer, it's still separated at the source, and it's still more valuable because it hasn't been diluted and polluted with other contaminants. It's just pure. If you can think of human waste as a pure material, it's pure human waste, which is what we want, because that has only what's been in our own bodies, not everything else.
Right. I get, like, you're saying that, I mean, if I'm getting you, I think you're saying that in the sewage, it could get mixed with anything else. What you really want is the human waste, depending. Okay. All right. We got terms now. Let's get to the grant. So I know you just wrapped a SARE grant project on this topic. Can you tell us how that was conducted and what you learned?
Sure. So within this study, we were evaluating these different soil amendments and the impacts on crop yields, being a corn silage crop is what we were growing, as well as soil health. And so we This trial started in 2022 was the first year, and it was replicated at a farm in Vermont and on Long Island, actually at the research farm down on Long Island. So we had two different site locations or production environments. And so corn silage was grown at both of those sites. And these were randomized replicated trials at both of these sites, comparing these 9 different treatments. So all of our treatments with the biochar, compost, urine were compared to a no fertilizer control, as well as urea being the most common fertilizer used. And in each year, or at the beginning and end of the 3 years, we measured soil health utilizing the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health. And when we measure soil health, all the listeners are familiar with this. We're talking about not just the chemical aspect properties of the soil, but the biological and physical properties as well. And those really being the important parameters to measure when we're talking about soil health. And so what we're finding here is that there are differences in our treatments. And what we know is that, particularly from a soil health perspective, that we really need to be cycling carbon or organic matter back into the system to see improvements in soil health. Because that organic matter is really the food for the microbes and let's say the glues for stabilizing soil particles together and having good soil structure. And so some of the early results, I will say I'm still doing some of the analysis here, so I can't say I'm 100% done with it, but we are seeing differences from a soil health perspective for some of the treatments with some of our more novel treatments where we add biochar and we add carbon or compost and urine. So we're getting that carbon in addition to our nitrogen needs for the crop. We're seeing higher soil health within those treatments. And similarly, when it comes to crop yield, and a lot of farmers are, hey, what's happening to my crop at the end of the day with these amendments? That we've seen that these amendments are performing equally as well as synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, our urea. And so while we're not necessarily so far seeing an improvement in crop yield, we're seeing equal performance to synthetic fertilizer. And I think that's really, really promising when it comes to utilizing these at a larger scale within the agricultural landscape.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like you could swap it out. In this case, it's the source separated urine. It's the urine product that would be replacing the conventional fertilizer.
Yep, and potentially the compost as well. So it's hard to, without kind of showing some data as an academic, it's hard for me to just say kind of equally what we're seeing across the board with the treatments. But where we're adding compost, urine, biochar, we're seeing greater benefits to soil health, and we're seeing equal performance with urea application in terms of crop yields. And so that idea is, hey, can we reduce or potentially eliminate our needs for synthetic fertilizer by using these really more renewable sources of fertility within agriculture? And they are not negatively affecting our crop yield, and they're providing positive benefit from a soil health standpoint.
Yeah, okay. And I think a lot of people in our audience probably are aware of how important soil health is for healthy crops. Do you have any insight onto why the soil health is better using the urine products versus conventional fertilizer?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say there is with soil health, we know we need to be adding carbon back to the system. So not necessarily just a urine alone treatment, but where we can add in compost and biochar in both those more readily available forms being compost and more stable forms being biochar for carbon, we're seeing improvements in soil health because it's that carbon that's really driving biological activity. And so when we add, I use, to some degree, carbon and organic matter a little bit interchangeably. Farmers tend to they measure organic matter. Many farmers will get a % organic matter on their soil test. So they have some idea what the organic matter is. And a fraction of that is soil organic carbon, the majority of it. But we know that organic matter is critical for soil physical health and soil biological health because that's feeding the microbes and the biology within the soil. And so without the carbon additions, we tend to see declines in soil health over time because we can't just be adding nutrients. We need to be adding nutrients along with organic matter to build soil health.
So that's why because your treatments are adding fertility and organic matter was what you're attributing the increased
Correct.
soil health to?
So we have 9 different treatments here. One of them being no fertilizer, another one just being urea, so only nutrients in a synthetic form. One being urine, only nutrients, but not in a synthetic form. And then we have other combinations of carbon and nutrients, our other 6 treatments. And so what we're tending to see is those amendments that have both the nutrient, or also NP and K, our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as well as carbon. That's where we're seeing the improvements in soil health.
Okay, that makes sense then. And I guess, I feel like what you're doing is like proof of concept. You're like, you should be able to get the fertility from the urine and organic matter from the other stuff. In theory, applied together, they would be better than just pure urea. And sounds like that's what you've proof of concept, and that's what your research found.
Yes, that's what we're finding. The data is supporting. Yep.
Okay. And I know part of your study involved social research on farmer attitudes and perceptions, in addition to the 3-year field experiment measuring the effect of those amendments. So what did farmers think about fertilizing with the various human waste products?
So we interviewed 21 farmers. Some of the people were not farmers per se, but were maybe horticulturalists of some kind, like a greenhouse manager. And we interviewed someone who was a community garden coordinator and somebody who advises farmers, but primarily they were farmers of different types and sizes. And we also did, as I mentioned before, 2 field days where we talked with farmers both in Long Island and in Vermont. And then we did dialogue groups, smaller groups with some of those participants at the field days to ask them about this. And we also did some surveys. So we have several different kinds of social research that we did. And so we haven't completely analyzed all of the data yet. But in general, I would say that the farmers pretty much didn't have any concerns or any significant concerns about using urine. Although they do want to see data down the road. They're really excited that we're doing the study because they want to see the results in terms of the plant health results and the soil health results. They have concerns, and again, I'm speaking just about urine here, but they have concerns about, some of them have concerns about what their customers might think. But it's interesting that that's really varies. Some of them think that it could be a positive thing if their customers understand that they're doing something environmentally sound or, stewardship of the environment, that could be a positive thing. And others think, well, some of my neighbors might, or customers might not like this, but it will require education. And then we start talking about what kind of education would be needed. And farmers have different opinions about how much they would advertise that they're doing this or not. Most of them would say, I would think the majority of them would say, I wouldn't go out of my way to advertise it, but I would be transparent about it. If somebody asked me, I would tell them what I was doing. As far as the biosolids, biochar, so I asked people about how they thought about biosolids, biochar. And one of the first things we learned was that the terminology was confusing to people. So we may have to come up with other words. But again, people had mixed feelings. Some farmers, most of the farmers that we interviewed, I think, really have a strong understanding that something needs to be done, and the current system is not sustainable and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to be throwing away our wasted nutrients. But they do have concerns about the use of biosolids, biochar, I think largely because, as you mentioned before, the experiences of people who had used biosolids alone. So they're very interested when they learn that biochar may be able to really reduce those contaminants. But then they start having some concerns about how rigorous the testing would be to ensure that. And then some of the farmers also have concerns about the energy costs, and they would like to see like a life cycle analysis to better understand, what would be the costs of making the biochar. And then when I ask people about how they feel about biosolids biochar versus Debbie referred to before as biomass biochar, which is basically biochar using some other source of organic matter, then people had questions about that. They had to give that quite a bit of thought as to, the benefits of using one over the other. Some people really thought using biosolids biochar makes a lot of sense because otherwise what's going to happen to these biosolids? They have to go somewhere. You have to do something with them. And some people think, and why are we taking woody debris and turning it into biochar? We should be just leaving that in the woods or doing something else with it, So there's a lot of different opinions about it. And I think a lot of that has to do with what type of farmer the person is or how long they've been farming. Or for some people, it has to do with what kind of soil they have and what they think is going to be most useful to them in their soil conditions. And then also how accessible these materials are going to be. Because some people feel if they're going to be driven a long way or, require a lot of transportation, then it doesn't make sense for me. But if I could get these materials locally, that could be great. So there's a lot of difference of opinion, and we're going to be trying to do some correlation to see if we can figure out, what kind of farmers are saying what and to better understand this. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another maybe not intuitively obvious thing about the biosolids biochar is that it doesn't have much available nitrogen, but it has a lot of available phosphorus. So in land that needs phosphorus, that could be a benefit. If there are places where phosphorus has already been over-applied, then you wouldn't want to use it for reasons totally unrelated to the biochar or the biosolids aspect, but just that high phosphorus content aspect. Also, there are other potential non-agricultural uses for biosolids biochar. So there's overlapping in terms of agriculture and wastewater management, but it can be used for pigments, for ink. It can be used in other processes. It can even be used as a filter for removing contaminants because there is some active bonding that can be done. The biosolid has some bonding ability. There's also even some studies pointing to the ability of biosolids biochar to immobilize PFAS that are already in soil. So it's kind of it's not all super intuitive. There may be situations where adding biosolids biochar or any biochar potentially to soil could soak up PFAS that are in the soil and immobilize it. So it's a really interesting question. It's, as I said, it's not something we have conclusive opinions on, but it puts a lot of dynamics into motion that are very interesting and potentially useful to explore.
One thing I want to clarify with biochar, and I think that's a little confusing for folks, is that when people hear biochar, they think it's one thing, but biochars are very diverse. Like I said, biochars can be made from any organic material that's a waste material. So when we're talking about woody biomass biochars, we're not talking about cutting down trees or anything like that. We're talking about materials that would otherwise be entering the waste stream in some capacity. And so with biosolids, one of the perks with actually creating biochar in general is we get a tremendous reduction in the mass and volume of the material itself. So even if the biosolids biochar ends up not being a good, or agriculture doesn't end up being a good application for biosolids biochar, and those biosolids still need to be landfilled because the majority of biosolids are currently landfilled. Or I can only speak for New York, actually, but I think that's generally true elsewhere. But if we could pyrolyze them and create biochar, and then they go back to the landfill, we're greatly reducing the volume and mass associated with that material, even if it does need to be landfilled. So as Abe and Tatiana mentioned, there's tons of other benefits to actually producing biochar from these waste materials.
And I wanted to add to that when I mentioned that some farmers talked about their soil conditions. And we also asked farmers what soil health indicators were important to them. And as you can imagine, some of the ones that farmers mentioned are reducing compaction, increasing nutrient retention, making soils more resilient in the face of drought, water holding capacity, all of those things. And biochar for some soils could be really helpful in that regard. So people were, I think in upstate, Debbie, and this was interesting, we actually haven't talked together about the soil health, the farmer interview results that much. So we're just sharing that now. But some of the farmers in upstate New York, in the Adirondacks, for example, were saying that their soils were very nutrient poor. And if they could do anything to improve the nutrient retention over time, they would want to do it. And they also liked this idea of, with biochar, as I understand it, you can do like a one-time application, and that might be good for a number of years. So that was interesting to them as well. So biochar has the capability to enable slower release of some nutrients and longer term retention of those nutrients in the soil. So that was interesting to farmers as well.
Right. Okay. Which is true of biomass biochar, of any kind of biochar, kind of like can hold on to soil nutrients, right?
Okay. And one of the aspects of this study that sets it apart from other biochar studies is that it's a many-year study, and it applies biochar a little bit every year. So rather than putting down a bunch of biochar in one or two applications, we're putting it down every year over a period of 5 years. So we just finished year 3. We're a little over halfway through, but we still have 2 more years with this other funding from FFAR that will let us see the cumulative effect. And one of the things that motivated us to do this, or one of the ideas we wanted to investigate, is the idea that it sticks around and it builds up over time. So we're applying at levels comparable to the compost organic matter, but the compost keeps breaking down and volatilizing, which is what compost does and should do. But the biochar sits in the soil, and every year it's like adding to a bank account where we're just putting more and more in. We're never withdrawing. And so after 5 years, we have cumulatively 5 applications of biochar in there. And over time, that has the potential to build up soil organic matter levels higher than you would if you were constantly adding that same amount of material, but as compost, something that can break down. But of course, the compost has other benefits in terms of feeding soil biology. So that's why we wanted to look at the soil health effect of those 2 different approaches, and not just 1 year or 2 years, but over a 5-year period.
Yeah, well, that's really cool that you have. It's kind of a long time, a number of years that you can take data from, since of course most people are farming for the long term, right? And so it's very important to look at those long term effects. So that's great that you're able to run the trial for that many years. Are there ways for farmers to make these products on their farms, or do they need to be sourced from some kind of processing company?
Yeah, I can talk about biochar here. So yeah, actually a lot of farmers make their own biochar at small scale. I work with a number of farmers, more so here in New York State, because I'm located in Ithaca, but I work across New York State and collaborate obviously beyond New York State. But a lot of farmers are making biochar themselves and using it within their systems. And this happens quite a lot with our perennial fruit crops, like our orchards and vineyards, where they have annual prunings that come from these crops. And then they'll end up basically pyrolizing that material and putting it back on their farm. And actually, one of the best uses and ways farmers are utilizing biochar is actually mixed with compost, because we tend to see synergistic effects when we add biochar to compost, either at the beginning of the composting process or at the end of it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's exciting that farmers are actually making biochar themselves. Even if it's small batch, they are basically making it. And that's one of the benefits of biochar too, is that it can be made at any scale, from small scale kilns or just kind of open systems on farm, all the way up to really integrated bioenergy facilities. And so on farms, it's small batch, kind of utilizing it kind of on the annual basis on their crops, or blending it in with compost. But it's a really diverse product, and farmers can easily make it on their farms, or they can get kind of small kilns. There are various kilns out there, like a Kontiki kiln or a ring of fire, or you can see an old oil drum, for example. So there's different small scale kind of systems that farmers do use. But they can also purchase it from larger scale suppliers across the region.
Okay. In fact, we've had a few articles in Growing for Market over the years about a few of the different, maybe some of the, I forget exactly what methods are covered, but I know some of the methods that you just mentioned have been covered. So there's articles in the archives of GFM if people want ideas for how to do it themselves. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand acts as your business coach and assistant, helping you sell out, save time, and grow smarter. From marketing to fulfillment to customer support, Farmhand pulls real data from what's worked and what hasn't for other farms and turns it into websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that give you your time back. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/GFM and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Seven Springs Farm Supply has been the market gardener's supply company for over 30 years. Their catalog includes a complete selection of organic fertilizers, pest and disease controls, growing mixes, and cover crop seed. Their experienced team is ready to help you problem solve and find the right solution for your farm and your goals. Seven Springs is committed to providing growers with superior products and service because they understand that their success depends on your success. Request a free paper catalog and learn more at www.sevenspringsfarmsupply.com. From December 17th through December 31st, Seven Springs is running its annual winter sale. Use code SNOW10 for 10% off. And now, back to the show. Yeah, well, so what about the urine product? Is it like on your website? I see the pictures of a farmer with a tank behind their tractor, like applying a liquid product. I mean, like, is it just pasteurized urine, and is that anything that farmers, can they make that on their farm, or is the idea that they'll be buying it from a company that's processing it?
One thing I would just add to what Debbie was saying about the biochar on farm is when you do one good thing, it's possible to inadvertently cause other trouble. And I just want to draw attention to the soot and the black carbon, that it's super important to any kind of combustion be burning in a way that minimizes the particulates and the soot, partly because of their climate impact. The black carbon from a badly managed pyrolysis kiln or even a wood stove can have a huge effect on climate compared to our other activities that we really is surprising when you quantify it. So a clean burn is a good burn.
Yes, we're not combusting here, and I should remind, we're pyrolizing here, so we're not actually having oxygen in the system there. And so that's, absolutely very important from a climate perspective.
And then the pyrolysis gases that come out need to be thoroughly combusted or they'll end up with particulates. Yeah, thanks for that pointing that out.
Before we go on to the urine, I also just wanted to mention that Debbie was speaking about biomass biochar, not biosolids biochar. So biosolids biochar that we did with a study, I don't think would be something that people could do on their farms because biosolids comes from a treatment plant. So I don't know if Abe wants to say a little more about that. But as far as I know right now, biosolids biochar is being made at some treatment plants, but not being made at a smaller scale.
Yeah, no, you definitely couldn't do that on a farm. It wouldn't be advisable even if it was legal. And it's critical at the wastewater plant that they have advanced emissions controls on that, because there are combustion, there's the drying gases, and then there's the combustion gases that need to be done very carefully because as we know, there are dangerous compounds in that biosolids that need to be combusted completely, or it would be quite polluting. In terms of the urine on farms, in our project, all the urine we distribute, we bring first centrally to the Rich Earth Institute, and then we process that under a permit from the state of Vermont. Pasteurization is the method we use to control pathogens in case they are present. And we don't know that they are, but we want to make sure that if they are, they're destroyed. And then we test it for nutrient content and we distribute it to farms. So whenever you see the Rich Earth tank and the urine going onto a hayfield or going into a cornfield, that's the urine that we have collected from hundreds of urine donors and processed and distributed. People also, though, do use it on their own gardens. and I know some farmers use it on their own farms. The Food Safety Modernization Act applies to many farms. Some farms have exemptions. So there's definitely issues around the regulations in that sense. And also there are local or state wastewater regulations that govern use of urine as a fertilizer. So in general, anyone who wants to start collecting urine beyond their home garden scale would be well advised to find out what the regulations are. And the Rich Earth Institute is definitely has helped people do that. It's often beyond what a farmer would want to do if they just wanted a new source of fertilizer. It's really something that a motivated organization or mission-driven farm or community would want to set up in order to realize all the environmental benefits. But there's certainly work involved in getting the permits and in collecting the urine, processing it. So that's something we want to see done more and more. But it really exists on two scales. One is the hyper-local home garden scale, and the other is when there's an organization that wants to make it a project and put some resources into it and realize some environmental benefits.
Okay, because that was going to be one of my questions: are there regulations on applying human waste? And it sounds like maybe there are, but they probably, like most things, they vary by state or jurisdiction or something like that.
Yes. The state, sometimes in some states, even by county. And there's the old adage that, anything that isn't illegal is legal, meaning that illegal things are defined by there being a law that says X is illegal. And so unless you do such and such, you cannot use such and such without a permit to do so. In the case of urine, no one has really written rules or regulations about urine fertilizers. So it's this square peg in a round hole. It just sort of falls into the lattice work of all the other regulations that apply to wastewater management or to on-site wastewater or to health codes or plumbing codes, things like that. So we're constantly working to figure out really what is allowed or not allowed in different jurisdictions with urine. And the home use, we don't have no way of really knowing in all the jurisdictions in the US what would be legal or not legal, but it seems that in many cases, the act of peeing outside is not illegal on your own land in most places, I believe. And then there's, at some point, that goes from being, I'm outside in the yard peeing on a tree, to someone saying you have a wastewater system that needs a permit. And so there's no real hard and fast line among all the jurisdictions in the US, or probably even within localities have different rules. But most home gardeners, I believe, are pretty far on one side of that line. But we also don't have any way. So we're not offering legal advice, but we do know that a lot of home gardeners do this, and they grow a lot of great vegetables.
Also, this might be a good time to mention that we have on our website available, we have two guides, one for gardeners and one for farmers on the use of urine as a fertilizer. And the farm guide, which we also did under a SARE grant, so we're very appreciative of SARE for providing us these grants over the years. But the farm guide goes into some of these regulatory issues. It talks about the Food Safety Modernization Act and what that covers and doesn't cover. And you do need to talk with people in your state to understand the state regulations, but that's a federal regulation, and we describe that in the guide.
Okay, and I'm glad you brought up the guides, because I meant to mention that you have guides on your website. So if people want to see what they can do on their own, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, we're always looking for feedback on them as well. If people look at the guides and you have questions or comments, or because we can always revise them down the road with what farmers need and want. So.
What about organic regulations? I know it's always always good if you're going to add anything. It's always good, even if it's on the OMRI list, to ask your certifier, make sure it's permitted. But do you know, are there regulations in the National Organic Program regulating this kind of stuff?
That's a great question, and it's a question that we have asked also, and have not gotten a clear answer on yet. What it hinges on largely is the fact that sewage sludge is prohibited from use on organic farms. That's very clear. That's part of the initial regulation, laid that out. Genetic engineering and sewage sludge are prohibited. Source-separated human urine is very different from sewage sludge, but it is also not explicitly allowed by the organic rules. And so there's a sort of an uncertainty around whether it is permissible under organic regs. And that means that a farmer if they're being cautious, is not going to go out on a limb with something that is in a gray area. And in certifying agencies, different ones may have different opinions. So it may be that some certifying bodies or organizations will say, yes, we understand it's not sewage sludge. It's a manure. It's a manure from a human animal. You can use it. Another one might say, well, it's still human waste. We don't want to certify that. So we would really, as a long-term goal, we really have inclusion of source-separated human urine as an organic fertilizer. I would love to see that. A lot of organic farmers would love to see that. Tatiana, do you want to say anything about what you've learned from conversations with farmers?
Yeah, the farmers, and Debbie may also have thoughts about this because you work with a lot of farmers, but in our interviews, we've talked with a lot of farmers. And I would say also relevant to this study that we just did, the SARE study, that the people who talk to us who are the most interested in participating in our studies are often the more sort of ecologically or environmentally oriented farmers. And so, like Abe said, if they're organic, they often say, well, like he said, I don't want to go out on a limb. I don't want to use it. There may be options to use it on an experimental basis. So there you would need to talk to your certifier in your state to see if they would allow that. But it's often these farmers who are in the category of organic not certified, who you probably are very familiar with. Many farmers are in the category of, I use organic methods, but I'm not certified for this, that, or the other reason. And those are the farmers who are most interested in using it. Yeah. So, and then we've asked farmers, do you think this should be certified under the National Organic Program? That's a question that I've been asking in these interviews. And I would say the majority say yes, they think it should be, but they also have doubts about whether it would be, whether it could be through the process, the existing process of getting things approved. Just because we would have to provide a lot of data showing that the safety but it could be, we just don't know. So that is an area that we want to investigate further as to what would be the best approach to trying to get it approved. But I think most people think that it should be allowable.
And that's why the study is important, because we're looking at the soil health impacts, because organic isn't just about prohibited and allowed substances. It's also about supporting the soil and its health. And so the outcome of the study will help show, what effect urine has, and maybe in recommendations. Like, I wouldn't recommend that any farmer, organic or otherwise, use just urine as the only fertility management method. There has to be some sort of organic matter, whether it's going to be a cover crop or an added compost, which is what our study is also confirming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to add about the National Organic Standard when it comes to biochar applications, that manure-derived biochars, so biosolids and any biochar made from manure is not permitted through the National Organic Standard. Organic farmers can't use those materials. They can use biochar produced from woody waste materials and other biomass products, but biochar produced from manures, it's not allowed by the National Organic Standard. But there are biochars out there that are OMRI certified, and that you can definitely have that approval for organic farmers. But specifically, it's manure. So biochars produced from manure feedstocks that are not permitted on organic farms.
Okay. Thank you for
Other types of biochar are permitted on organic farms, and there are specific biochars that are OMRI certified.
Right. Okay. Because they're pyrolyzed wood. If I'm using it's basically burned, or I realize burned isn't the right term. I really want to say burned. It's pyrolyzed wood.
Burned's a lot easier for people to say and think about it. But yes, and part of it is because we know, manure is a huge source of fertility for organic farmers, but specifically it's not, you can't modify it to be biochar produced from manure for organic farms.
Yeah. Okay. What about peeing on your compost pile? What if someone's listening to this interview, they're fired up, they're want to stop wasting those nutrients? If you have if you're amassing materials to make a compost pile, could you pee on it? We have an outhouse on my farm. We could add another bucket and say, pee here. Would that increase the nitrogen and potentially, I know you said phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients. Like if you collected your urine and dumped it on your feedstocks before you started composting it, I mean, I get most people would want it. Like I think it would, just like if your feedstock was raw animal manure, you would want it to go through that composting process. I'm like, am I wrong to say like 1 + 1 = 2? Like you could just put urine on your compost feedstocks and then like let them go through the composting process. I'm thinking you would get higher nitrogen compost as the finished product. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that.
You'd be adding nitrogen, you'd be adding water, also some other nutrients. And the question is, does that compost pile, that particular compost pile, want more nitrogen and more water? So if it's a food waste compost pile, then typically no, you wouldn't want more of either of those things. If it was a leaf pile, then that would be great. We did some SARE-funded research, Rich Earth Institute did several years back, on making compost out of urine and shredded leaves, raked up leaves from the autumn, shred them up and mix them with urine. And that made a wonderful compost. And it depends on whether the compost needs those two things. Also, it depends on whether that urine is going to run. If you're dumping a whole bucket of urine on something, it could run right through into the ground. And then you would just be putting those nutrients into the ground rather than a compost pile. But yeah, it's just one more. It is like cow urine or horse urine or any kind of urine. If your compost pile needs moisture and needs nitrogen, then yes, it would definitely supply those very well. Oh, but actually, let me add on to that. But we typically recommend that people use urine in liquid form because people may not have it takes a big compost pile to take 120 gallons of urine that a person makes over the course of a year. But you can apply that in liquid form directly to the soil next to a crop that needs the nutrients because it is immediately available nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And as long as that soaks into the soil and you water it in or the soil is moist already, then the ammonia will stay safely in the soil and feed those plants directly. So often I think it's better to make compost separately, have a nice high carbon compost you can apply as mulch or give to the soil as organic matter, and then apply the urine where you need it, when you need it, in the amount you need. Because that's actually one of the benefits of having it in liquid form is you really get to be selective about where you put it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, things that are liquid are pretty easy to apply as long as you have a tank or a way to apply them.
But that said, a lot of people do ask us about this, and it is very convenient to just throw it on your compost. So if you have a very carbonaceous compost pile, you have a lot of garden debris and stuff, it's fine to throw it on there as long as it's not going right through, like Abe said. But, and also just to mention that the Food Safety Modernization Act that we talked about before, and it doesn't apply if you're just growing the food for yourself. And there's also income limits, like it applies to produce on farms, but if your income is under a certain amount, it doesn't apply to that. So it can be practically used by small scale growers or homesteaders.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right, because the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, applies to make sure food is safe that people are growing to be sold. So,
right,
pretty much, people in their gardens can do whatever they want.
Well, people in the gardens aren't regulated by that rule. I just want to be careful not to speak in authority saying, you listener out there in a certain place, you can legally do this. We don't really know what the rules are in all the places, but we can talk about what's safe. And we can talk about the rules we know about. So that's really, all we can do.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, good point. All right. Well, so what I'm hearing is that this technology works as well as fertilizer and it potentially even has soil health benefits beyond just straight chemical fertilizer. Like urine might be better than urea in some ways. So I feel it seems like you're well on your way to proving proof of concept. I know there's 2 more years left on your study, but so if it seems like you're proving that it works, what's the next step for all this? What's the next step for the Rich Earth Institute? So based on this research, what would progressing with this technology look like?
That's a big question and multidimensional. At the Institute, we have a lot of different projects going, some of them very technical and farm-based like this, some social in terms of research or social in terms of education and outreach. I can talk about what I think are some of the most exciting avenues right now. One of them is another urine processing avenue, We have a urine processor. It's a passive urine processor made out of charcoal, biochar actually, woody biochar. And we trickle urine through that, and it transforms the ammonia into nitrate. Half the ammonia turns into nitrate, and it eliminates all the odors, eliminates all of the turbidity, the cloudiness, and you end up with this crystal clear, still yellow, but crystal clear, odorless material that is a very nice fertilizer that I think anyone would react to it as like, this is quality stuff. It's not, there's nothing about it that would turn a person off due to its like actual characteristics. So I think that's exciting about making urine fertilizer available to people more in a retail setting or in a home setting or in a setting where like there's nothing to object to, I guess is what I say. Urine fertilizer, the pasteurized urine we make certainly has an odor. It dissipates quickly, and on a farm it's not a problem. In a garden, typically it's not a problem either. But there's something about making this charismatic, sort of deluxe, high quality material that I think is giving urine its due. It's truly turning it into this gold liquid. Someone would say, wow, that's amazing. So that's one thing. And we want to do more research on that and develop that into a larger capacity device. The other is on the supply side, because we have a lot of farmers who like using urine. We have more farmers who will take urine than we have urine to give to them. But where does it all come from? And in Brattleboro, we're very fortunate. We have a community of people who are excited about recycling their urine. It's this next level recycling. They want to see that happen. They go to the extra length to recycle their urine through our program. But for urine recycling to become more mainstream, I think it has to be driven by more practical reasons and motivations. And so we're excited about work that's happening on Cape Cod right now, because they have this extreme nitrogen pollution problem where their coastal ponds, their embayments are being just overrun with algae. They're toxic algae. The dogs die if they drink the water sometimes, and they smell. It's a massive problem. And they're looking at a multi-billion-dollar price tag for sewering the entire Cape. And there's strong interest on the Cape now of using urine diversion as one of the tools to meet their nitrogen reduction quotas that they have mandated by the EPA. So that's a location where it looks like urine diversion is in the process of being implemented to solve an urgent and pressing and expensive problem. And I think that's an exciting next step for a place where it's motivated by wanting to do the right thing to a place where it's actually solving a crisis, or, partially it's part of the solution to a crisis. And I think that's a place where the approach has a chance to mature in a way. There's municipalities that are involved. There are all sorts of institutions that are involved in supporting this. The Massachusetts DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, has funded this project, and towns are involved. So those are two exciting directions for me. I'll let others say what they think are next steps.
We're doing some research on different application methods, because farmers always want to know, how would I apply this and what's the best way? So we've done some nice partnership projects with farmers to look at different methods. And then farmers would like to see research they're very interested in this effects on soil microbiology or other soil fauna. So luckily in this other 2 years that we have for this project, we are going to be able to look a little bit at impacts on microbial diversity, or whether what kind of changes in the microbial ecosystem that we're seeing in the soil. So we're excited that we're going to be able to do that, because farmers have been asking about that. And then, farmers have said they'd like to see longer term studies, again, on soil health, on potential contaminants or microcontaminants in soil over time. They would like to see studies on different crops. This one farmer we've worked with we've done trials with not just corn, but we've also done hemp, figs in a greenhouse, flowers. But one farmer just mentioned that he'd like to try it on squash and potatoes, because things that could be applied as you're planting or as a side dressing, the urine. So those are things that the funding situation is, as is getting difficult. And a lot of doing this depends on whether we can get funding, but those are some of the kind of things I've heard that farmers would be interested in. I don't know, Debbie, if you have thoughts about research that might emerge out of this.
No, I think it's really important that, we're both like an organization like Rich Earth Institute and academic institutions like myself at Cornell, I think it's really important that we collaborate on research and practical or applied research like we are doing. I think that partnership is really important, and absolutely engaging with farmers in all aspects of the process. We have to let the science and the data speak, and we're collecting that here, and we have that to share. But we need to be working directly with farmers and in how, like, are they willing to adopt practices like this? And that's the social science research. So I think having research that not just is partnerships like we have here, but brings in both the natural and social sciences is really important to find a path forward. Because when it comes to soil health, when it comes to farm sustainability, I think we really need to be looking at more innovative and novel approaches to it, and looking at the integration of many different practices and disciplines and paths forward, and kind of thinking beyond just, hey, this is the traditional way of thinking, but we do need to look at urine and other waste products, because we have to deal with it. And while people might be afraid to, or not afraid, but uneasy to have some of these conversations, I think it's really important that we do, and that we have a scientific foundation to addressing some of these problems. So I think there are many different research questions in there, but I just think we need, continue working together. And I think particularly when it relates to agriculture, integrating farmers and keeping them engaged in the process, and partnering directly with them and conducting on-farm research is really important.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's potential there, just because farmers are already so used to the idea of fertilizing with other creatures' manure. It's like it's just a step to be like, let's use our own. So is the vision here that in like 5, 10, 20 years there'll be somebody who's bought a urine pasteurizer, and is like working with it, is sourcing urine from their community and then selling, urine fertilizer? What is this all building up to here?
Yeah, I would love to see source separation, sanitation just as a normal option in the wastewater management portfolio. And so that's what we're working toward, and that's what Cape Cod is important about, because that's a place where they have a lot of options, a lot of different systems for wastewater management, on-site or centralized, and we're seeing where urine diversion fits in. And so I think that it's something where there'll be some settings where urine diversion is the best and the most cost-effective option, or people just want that one because they want to do the recycling option, and then the tools will be available, the permitting pathways will be already traveled, and people will be able to say, great, we'll file for that, we'll get the equipment, and we'll hand out the literature to the folks to choose to have this kind of toilet and have a project. The vision of the Rich Earth is that we try to do all the hard work and make all the mistakes and fall down all the different rabbit holes, and then come back up with information from the process, so the next group doesn't have to do that. Because it's been a tremendous amount of work over the last decade plus to do this, and it's nothing that I would recommend that any little town that wanted to deal with nitrogen undertake that, because it has been a massive research project. But we're a research institution; that's our purpose, and our goal is to make it easier for the folks who want to do it in their community for their own reasons.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you pretty well convinced me that it would be good for farmers and it would be good for the environment to, stop putting all this fertility straight into the environment. But I can see how having, I know like doing something the first time is usually the hardest. And so I can see how finding a community like Cape Cod, for example, that like has this pressing problem, like they have a need to fix this. If they could try it out, and if other people can look to that project and see like, oh, it works, that might be what you need to just get the ball rolling in more communities to adopt that technology. I wanted to make sure and ask you about Brightwater though, because I know you said that you have this other a separate company, I guess, and so do you want to tell us a bit about about what you're doing with Brightwater?
Sure. Yeah. So Brightwater is a spin-off company from the Rich Earth Institute. It was able to form through a National Science Foundation grant to pursue freeze concentration as a method for making concentrated fertilizer out of urine. So I'm the chief technology officer over there. I'm also part owner of the company, so that's important to mention. And we make fertilizer. We make urine processing equipment. It also can be used for processing other high-strength wastewaters like digestate from an anaerobic digester or other materials that are rich in nutrients. And so Brightwater makes a pasteurizer, a freeze concentrator, and a carbon filter that can be mixed and matched. And urine is the market that we just installed one for over in France, just outside Paris. There's an organization that is pursuing urine diversion in Paris, and they need to process that urine. And so they're using one of the Brightwater pasteurizers. The point of Brightwater is to have equipment available when a community or an organization wants to do urine diversion. They can just order the right equipment and install it and use it according to the manual and get pasteurization or get freeze concentration. So no one has to start a project and invent things at the same time.
Yeah. It'll be nice that people won't have to reinvent that wheel. If they can get it from you. Okay, cool. Well, that's the questions that I had for you today. Is there anything I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
We really appreciate your having us on this podcast. And one reason is because I've heard that podcasts are something that farmers really like to listen to and learn from. So when you ask what would be emerging from this research, or maybe we didn't really ask this. Well, we did ask question. I have been asking farmers questions about what form of information is most useful to you, or what form of education would be most useful to you. And it's all over the map. Everybody wants something different, but that's an area that I think we can explore, and we will be continuing to explore, is what kind of education is going to be most effective with this type of transformation, trying to move towards a transformation in how we utilize human waste requires obviously a massive, paradigm shift in people's thinking, because we've been on this other trajectory of how we use it. So figuring out the best educational strategies and learning from farmers in particular about what they need and want is an important avenue that we're continuing to explore. And this is one part of that, doing podcasts. So thanks.
Yeah, you're most welcome. I think this is super interesting. I do think podcasts are a great format for farmers. I know I listen to a lot of them just because there's so many jobs in farming. You got busy hands, but not a busy mind. So I love to just pop on a podcast and listen to something while I'm doing something that's otherwise pretty mundane.
People can also go to our website to learn a lot more about what we do and find a lot of publications. If you're local to our area, people can also sign up to be urine donors, participate in the program. And anyone who's inspired by this can also make a financial donation if they want to. We're largely supported by donations, particularly with the decrease in other avenues of funding recently. So that's also much appreciated.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought up the website. Can you say what the web address is? I'm sure most people can find it, but if you say it, and for all three of you, if you could just say, if there's places that you want people to find you online or social media or wherever you want people to look you up, if you could say that, tell people where to find you.
Our website is richearthinstitute.org. And on Instagram, we are P-Cyclers, P-E-E Cyclers.
And yeah, people can find me just at Cornell University. We're currently reworking our website and bringing everything over from Cornell Waste Management Institute to the New York Center for Organics, Recycling, and Education. But if people look up Cornell Waste Management Institute right now, all the information is there, and it will be brought over to a new platform within the new year. But people can connect with me on LinkedIn as well if they have questions directly. And I just want to put it out there that we have a lot of extension and outreach opportunities, a lot of workshops and field days as it relates to soil health or composting, organics, recycling, and use all across New York State, and also with collaborators across the Northeast. So if there are farmers who are interested in attending those events, kind of hands-on demonstrations or, interactive in-person events, definitely get in contact with me and I can add you to our listserv. And thanks very much for hosting us, Andrew.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Cornell is such a great resource. I used to work on a farm that was just outside of Ithaca, and so I got to expose to some of the. People don't have to be in New York State to know Cornell. I think Cornell is pretty well known as got a lot of good ag resources, but that was a fun thing when we lived close by and could tap into some of those resources that are in there around where Cornell is. So yeah, great resources there.
And just one last thing, our email address for Rich Earth is info@ richearthinstitute.org. So if people have questions or follow up, you can contact us that way.
Okay, great. Well, Abe, Debbie, Tatiana, thank you so much. I really enjoyed hearing about this, and I bet our audience will too. So thanks so much. And, let us know, if a few years get down the road and have big updates on this. I think this is an interesting subject and very relevant to our audience. So let us know, keep us posted as things develop with this project.
Thanks, Andrew. You sure will. Thank you.
All right.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.